story about loyalty is just a myth, a beautiful illusion we were taught to believe so we wouldn't lose our minds in a world where everyone, deep down, is just looking out for themselves. What if loyalty isn't the norm, but a rare, fading exception? Something that only exists when someone is willing to pay the price for it. From childhood, they tell you, if you're honest, if you're kind, if you give, people will stay. You grow up giving, protecting, forgiving. You believe that sincerity builds real bonds. You think the more you open your heart, the stronger the connection becomes. And then one gesture, one decision, and the person you trusted either disappears or worse, stays, but their eyes no longer see you. You search for logic and you find none because this isn't about logic. This is about instinct, about a deep, ancient reflex, something primal in us to survive no matter what. If you want to understand betrayal, stop thinking in terms of right and wrong. People don't betray out of hatred. They betray because when survival or benefit demands it, they choose themselves. Look at history. Caesar entered the Senate like a god, surrounded by allies, friends, brothers in arms, and among them, Brutus, the one he saw as almost a son. But when cold steel sank into his back, Caesar didn't scream in pain. He whispered, "You too, Brutus?" That wasn't a question. It was awakening. In that second, he realized no one is too close to betray you. There's only until it's no longer useful. You think that just because someone is close, because you've shared things, because they once looked at you with warmth, they couldn't possibly destroy you. But you're wrong, because when your value in their world begins to fall, or when your presence becomes less beneficial, you turn into a burden. And people don't negotiate with burdens. They eliminate them quietly, coldly, without guilt. And the most painful thing isn't even the betrayal itself. It's what it shows you about yourself. You thought you mattered. You believed you had a place in someone's soul, but you were just a placeholder until something better came along. And once that moment came, you were erased. Instantly, without a fight, without explanation, and there you stand full of questions like a child locked outside their own home. You begin turning inward, thinking, did I give too much? Zrina, was I too available? Zrina, did I trust too easily? But the truth isn't in you. The truth is that you walked into a game where no one told you the rules. You played with heart. They played with calculation. And that was your first mistake. This story repeats itself. Seneca, the philosopher who mentored an emperor, he believed in virtue, in the strength of wisdom, in the value of truth. But when Nero seized power, he ordered Seneca to die, not because the old man failed, but because he had become too powerful, too respected, too visible, and so they removed him. Just like that. Even wisdom and loyalty couldn't save him. This world isn't run on sincerity. It's run on power and interest. Kindness, intelligence, and faithfulness don't protect you from betrayal because human bonds aren't built on morals. They're built on balance. And when that balance breaks, so do relationships. You thought someone stayed because you were special, but they stayed because you were convenient. And when you stopped being that, they erased you like you were never there. Then comes the realization, harsh, bitter. You didn't just lose someone, you lost your image of yourself. You thought you could read people, that your intuition was sharp. And now you don't even trust your own instincts. That's not just pain, that's identity collapse. From this moment forward, you no longer look at others with faith. You scan them. You dissect their words, their silences, their reactions. You don't believe what they say, not because you're wise, but because you're wounded. You've become a wall. But inside that wall, there's nothing. You tell yourself, no one will ever hurt me like that again. I won't let anyone in. I'll be strong. But that strength, it's fear wearing armor. It's not clarity, it's survival. The survival of someone who's already burned and now refuses to walk into any house, even if it's full of light. Because now you know anything can catch fire again and take you with it. Betrayal isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with screams, slamming doors, or dramatic exits. Sometimes it arrives quietly, without words, without confrontation, without sound. Sometimes betrayal is absence. When you're drowning and someone simply watches from the shore, you expected a strike, prepared for conflict, but nothing came. No explosion, no goodbye. They didn't leave. They simply weren't there when it mattered most. Not physically. No, they were still around. But in truth, they were gone. They didn't do anything wrong, and that's what makes it hurt more. You can't accuse them. You can't point to a date, a message, a moment. There's no obvious act, only a deep, unmistakable knowing. When you were falling apart, they didn't reach for you. This is silent betrayal, not through action, but through passive detachment. When someone who should have stood beside you turns into a ghost, when you look in their eyes and see no fear for you, no sadness, no connection, only that cold, emotionless, I don't want to get involved. History is full of moments like these. When Socrates was sentenced to death, many of those who once admired him, who called him teacher, simply vanished. They didn't betray him directly, they chose neutrality. And with that, they signed his death sentence. You face the same. There's no confrontation, no clear memory of betrayal, just a quiet shift and the realization that you were left alone. You try to explain it away. They had their own problems. They didn't know how to help. I didn't ask for anything directly. You rationalize the pain because facing the truth would crush you. You were truly, completely alone in your darkest hour. And that kind of loneliness doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your identity. You ask yourself, did I not deserve to have someone stay? And then comes the deeper wound. Maybe it was all one-sided. Maybe I mattered only while I was useful. And now you're standing inside silence, the kind that screams louder than any fight. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if your why vanished along with those you thought would never leave? What if it wasn't a knife that broke your will, but emptiness? And this is where the real transformation begins. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you. You realize no one is obligated to show up. You understand either you rise or you remain in ruins. The strength Nietzsche wrote about is not brute force. It is conscious solitude. It is the ability to stand in silence and not lose your voice. To survive betrayal without becoming cynical, but the path is dark. You ache. And still, a part of you hopes they return. Not to forgive, but because a small part of you still clings to the illusion, maybe they just didn't know how to be there for me. And so you lie to yourself because deep down you know if they truly wanted to, they would have found a way. Then something shifts. You stop waiting. You no longer hope. You don't seek revenge. You don't explain. You simply disappear from their world, from within, quietly. And that is your power. They didn't expect that. They anticipated drama, tears, accusations. They were used to you fighting. But this time, you went silent. And that silence, that's the consequence. Silence says more than words ever could. It doesn't ask to be understood. It doesn't beg. It is the final act of clarity, the answer to those who chose not to show up when you were dying on the inside. In that silence, you are not weak. You are cleansing. You no longer depend on presence. You become whole, without props, without illusions, without them. The will to live, as Nietzsche described it, doesn't come in moments of triumph. It is born the moment you are utterly alone and rise anyway. Not to prove something, but because your essence is to rise, you've been betrayed. You know what it feels like when a knife enters your back and you don't even feel pain at first, just cold. You know what it means to scream silently while remaining composed on the outside. You know what it means to be alone when you were certain you weren't. But now you have to ask the one question everyone avoids. How many times have you betrayed yourself? How many times did you feel hurt but stayed anyway? How many times did you see the lack of respect and still made excuses? How many times did you lie to yourself saying everything was fine while something inside you was suffocating? These weren't misunderstandings, they were betrayals. Not from them, from you. You betrayed yourself when you stayed silent, when you should have stood up and walked away. You betrayed yourself when you convinced yourself that you were asking for too much, when all you really wanted was the bare minimum respect. You thought patience was a virtue. You thought love could melt coldness. You thought that if you were kind enough, they'd finally see your value. But no, you simply placed yourself at their feet and hoped they'd lift you up. Instead, they used you. You became convenient, loyal to the point of self-destruction, strong, but never for yourself, for them, so that things would be easier, smoother, more comfortable for them. You became a version of yourself that no longer included you. And now you stand in front of the mirror and realize the deepest wound wasn't theirs, it was yours. You betrayed your own feelings, your own boundaries, your own voice. You handed people the power to define your worth, to decide how to treat you, and now you wonder why they cross every line. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are," and instead you became what others needed you to be. You betrayed your will, you silenced your "I want," your "I can't," your "enough." You became pleasant, but you stopped being alive. You lived as if you had a second chance, as if the pain could be delayed, as if time was infinite. But the pain you don't allow yourself to feel doesn't disappear. It turns into anger, into resentment, into bitterness, and soon you don't even know who you're mad at more, them or yourself. You begin turning into the very thing you hate. You start closing off, manipulating, pushing away. You say, "I don't trust anymore." But what you really mean is, "I no longer trust myself." And here, the path begins, not toward revenge, not toward proving anything, but back to yourself. You start asking the uncomfortable questions. You trace the steps where you gave in, where you stayed quiet, where you pretended it didn't hurt, where you allowed what never should have been allowed, not because you're weak, but because you were afraid to lose. And in the end, you lost anyway. Not them, you. Nietzsche said suffering is not a curse. It is the raw material of growth. It is the forge of the self. And now you have that material. Your pain is not your burden. It is your tool. If you can look at yourself in the mirror without turning away, without making excuses, but seeing all of it, then you've already begun. You are not weak, you just forgot who you are. You were too busy being acceptable, agreeable, digestible, so much so that you forgot to be real. Now comes the choice. You can wear the mask again, you can tell yourself none of it matters. You can retreat into your usual defenses, into detachment, into control, into "I don't care." Or you can step into the fire that doesn't destroy but purifies, the fire that reminds you that true will isn't about forcing others to value you. It's about refusing to sell yourself for scraps. Your strength is not in enduring, it's in walking away the moment they lose you. Your wisdom is not in over-explaining, it's in not explaining at all where no one listens. And in that fire, if you stay, if you don't run, you will be reborn without a mask, without a role, without fear. You used to think betrayal was the end, that once it happened, you'd never recover, never trust again, never feel alive. You thought it was a final point in your story, and what followed was just emptiness. But over time, you began to understand betrayal isn't a period, it's a blade, sharp, brutal, but not necessarily fatal, because everything depends on what it cuts through. And slowly you realize when someone betrays you, not only does the person leave your life, everything unnecessary leaves with them. The illusion leaves, the dependency leaves. The fragile hope you were feeding, the role you were playing, the version of you that bent over backwards to preserve something already falling apart, all of that dies. And what remains is you, the real you, without masks, without scripts, without the need to be liked. And in that rawness, there is no weakness, there is strength, because now you no longer live in anticipation. You no longer beg, you no longer ask for clarity, you see, and you choose. Yes, at first, solitude feels like a punishment. You feel stripped, as if not just a person, but part of your soul was ripped away. You feel as if you've lost light, direction, and meaning. But then comes the shift. Were you ever really not alone? Were those around you truly present? Or were they just warm bodies feeding off your light while offering none in return? And suddenly you understand you didn't lose, you were freed. Freed from pretending, from shrinking, from clinging to something that only appeared to be warmth, but never truly kept you warm when it mattered. Solitude stops being a prison. It becomes a space where, for the first time in a long time, you can actually hear yourself. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot live alone is a slave." And now you understand why. Because only in solitude do you stop performing, stop pleasing, stop negotiating your soul for crumbs. Only in solitude does the real cleansing begin. Not magical, not poetic, raw, bloody, slow, but honest. You finally tell yourself the truth about those you kept close, not out of love, but out of fear. About the things you endured, not because you were strong, but because you were terrified of being alone. And the deepest pain, it's not the loss. It's the realization that you allowed the lie to stay in your life for too long, and now you stand in the wreckage. And for the first time, you don't try to rebuild it. You don't try to fix, restore, or get back what was. Because for the first time, you don't want it back. You want to go forward. Betrayal stripped you down to your core. It showed you who was really there and who only needed you when you were easy to hold. It wasn't just a wound, it was a filter. And now you'll never again let someone close who doesn't know how to hold your soul gently. You no longer need. Not because you're hardened, but because you're whole. There are no empty holes in you screaming to be filled. You don't cling to the first one who offers warmth. You observe slowly, quietly, intentionally, because now you know the worst kind of loneliness is not being alone, is it's being with someone who makes you feel alone on the inside. You no longer accept almost. You don't settle for at least it's something, because now you know the value of your silence, of your space, of your truth. And in that moment, you become someone else, not colder, but clearer. You no longer drag dead connections behind you. You no longer try to save what doesn't want to live. You no longer prove. You no longer chase. You simply walk away from where you aren't heard and remain where you're felt without speaking. You don't turn pain into armor. You turn it into vision, into discernment, into an intuition sharpened by betrayal. You don't become bitter. You become awake. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." And you finally understand betrayal was your chaos. But what it birthed was not destruction, it was a star. You no longer need outside approval to feel worthy. You no longer seek love to fill a void, because now there is no void, there is silence. But it's not frightening anymore, it's comforting. Because in that silence, you're with yourself, the real you, whole. And if someone enters your life now, they won't complete you. They'll simply walk beside you. And that will be enough, because now you don't depend. Now you choose. You're no longer the person you were at the beginning. Even if you wanted to go back, you couldn't, because everything inside you has already changed. You've seen how easily promises fall apart, how people disappear when you need them most, how those you gave your heart to can take a piece of you and leave like you never mattered. And for a long time, you thought that pain would last forever, that you'd carry anger as armor, that you'd live differently now, more guarded, more distant, more controlled. But you were wrong. The pain didn't come to stay. It came to show. At first, it burned everything, and it felt like you were disappearing, but now you understand it wasn't you that disappeared. It was everything extra, all the illusions, all the masks, all the expectations and attachments, everything that stopped you from being who you really are. The pain didn't destroy you, it revealed you. You no longer want to be loved just to feel worthy. You no longer want to be needed just to feel like you belong. You simply want to be, without contracts, without conditions, without fear. You've learned to be alone, and in that solitude, you didn't find emptiness, you found peace. Not coldness, but honesty. You stopped living to be validated by others. You finally understood your worth is within you. It's not given, it's realized. Now you look at people differently, not with suspicion, but with awareness. You no longer believe words, you watch actions, silences, the shadows between the lines. You don't wait, you don't chase, you don't cling, you choose, consciously, quietly. And that is your new freedom. Nietzsche once said, "What doesn't kill us makes us stronger," but he didn't add, "only if you understand why it didn't kill you." If you don't understand, you stay broken, hardened, shut down. But if you do, something else is born. You become transparent, selective, whole. You no longer idealize. You don't believe in forever, but you do believe in sincerity. You know everything can end, and that's exactly why you no longer hide. Because now you're not afraid of loss, you're only afraid of betraying yourself. That's it. Because once you lived in a personal hell where you stayed far too long in something already dead, and you're never going back there. You don't expect to be understood. You speak clearly or you stay silent forever. You no longer argue for the right to be yourself. You just walk away from places where that right isn't respected. You don't plead, you don't pull, you don't justify. You simply do not return where you're not deeply seen. And that's not bitterness, that's maturity. The quiet, grounded maturity of someone who no longer wants to be saved because they've already saved themselves. You didn't become harder, you became clearer. Your boundaries aren't walls, they're lines of respect. Your solitude isn't exile, it's sacred space. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. And in that depth, you live. Not halfway, not with caution, but fully, with open eyes, with real yes and real no, with dignity, with calm, the kind that only comes after surviving a storm. And here's the paradox, you no longer fear betrayal, because you no longer place your soul as collateral for someone just to stay. You're not afraid of being disappointed in others because you're no longer disappointed in yourself. Everything you needed, you've reclaimed. Yourself, not the old you, but the reborn one, the one purified by fire, the one who no longer loses themselves to keep someone else. You didn't become taller, you became deeper. You didn't become louder, you became quieter. But in that quiet, everything can be heard. You didn't become strong to prove something. You became strong so you'd never again become less than what you are. In you now, there is a new honesty, a new silence, a power that doesn't shout, a choice. And it's not the choice to be better than everyone else. It's the choice to be free inside.